My wife told me never to open one drawer in her office. She said it was only work paperwork. One night I opened it anyway. Inside was a marriage certificate, and I wasn't the husband on it. For years, I never touched that drawer. Not once. I trusted her completely. That drawer stood quietly in the corner of the room like it didn't even exist, and I never had a reason to question it, until the day I saw my own name written next to another man's name on a document that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My name is Daniel. I had been married to Laura for 11 years. We didn't have the kind of marriage people talked about in dramatic stories. No shouting, no broken plates, no long silent treatments. We were calm, predictable, comfortable with each other, or at least I thought we were. Laura worked from home 3 days a week. She had converted the small spare bedroom into an office shortly after the pandemic started. At first it was temporary, then it slowly became permanent. She bought shelves, a better chair, a second monitor, new lamps, filing boxes. The room changed from a guest room into something else entirely, something private. At some point she started closing the door while she worked. That wasn't strange at first. Everyone needs concentration, meetings, calls, deadlines. I respected that. I never walked in without knocking. It felt natural, healthy even. One evening, about 2 years after she set up the office, I walked past the doorway while she was organizing files. The door was open. Papers were spread across the desk. She looked unusually tense. When she saw me, she quickly closed one of the drawers. "Please don't open that one," she said. She smiled right after saying it, like she wanted the moment to feel casual, harmless. "Why?" I asked. "Just work stuff, contracts, client details, confidential." Her answer sounded reasonable. She worked with sensitive documents. She had mentioned confidentiality before. I didn't question it. I nodded and walked away. That was the last time I thought about that drawer for a long time. Life continued the way it always had. Laura woke earlier than me every morning. She made coffee before I came downstairs. She always remembered which mug I preferred, the blue one with the small chip on the handle. She said it made coffee taste better. I never argued with her about that. On weekends, we went grocery shopping together. She always walked slightly ahead of me through the aisles. I followed with the cart. It became our routine, quiet, familiar, predictable. If someone had asked me back then whether I trusted my wife, I would have said yes immediately, without hesitation. Looking back now, I realize trust isn't something that disappears all at once. It fades slowly. The first thing that changed was her schedule. Laura started spending more time in her office. At first it was just an extra hour after dinner. Then sometimes she stayed inside until midnight. She said deadlines had increased, new responsibilities, new clients. It sounded normal. Her company had been growing. Still, something about the way she closed the door started to feel different. Before, the door was closed because she was working. Now it felt closed because she didn't want interruptions. There is a difference between those two things. You don't notice it immediately, but once you feel it, you can't ignore it anymore. One night I woke up around 2 in the morning and noticed her side of the bed was empty. That wasn't unusual either. Sometimes she worked late, but when I walked downstairs, the office light was on and the door was locked. Locked. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the handle like it might explain something to me. Laura had never locked that door before. I almost knocked. Instead, I went back upstairs. The next morning, she acted completely normal. She made coffee. She asked if I wanted eggs or toast. She smiled the same way she always did. I almost convinced myself I imagined the locked door. Almost. But later that same day, when she left the house to meet a friend for lunch, I walked past the office again. The door was slightly open. For the first time in 11 years of marriage, I stood in front of that room and felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. And that was the moment I remembered the drawer she told me never to open. I stood in the hallway longer than I should have. The office door was open just a few inches, enough to see the corner of her desk, enough to see the chair slightly turned away, like she had left the room quickly. The house was completely silent. No television, no footsteps, no movement anywhere. Laura had told me she would be gone at least an hour. I told myself I wasn't going inside to search for anything. I only wanted to look. That's what I believed at the time. I stepped into the room slowly, almost like I was entering someone else's house. The air inside felt different, still, closed, private. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. A new stack of folders on the shelf, a small lockbox near the printer, a second phone charger near the lamp. I didn't remember seeing that charger before. I stood near the doorway for a moment, unsure what I was doing there. Then I walked toward the desk. The drawer was exactly where I remembered it, second from the top, the one she had closed quickly that evening 2 years earlier, the one she had asked me never to open. My hand stopped halfway before touching the handle. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about something else, something quiet but persistent, the kind of feeling that doesn't disappear once it starts. I told myself again that it was probably nothing, just contracts, just paperwork, just something confidential for work. Still, my hand didn't move away. I opened the drawer. Inside were folders, neatly organized, too neatly. Everything was arranged in a way that didn't look temporary. It looked permanent, structured, intentional. The first folder contained printed emails, mostly business conversations, names I didn't recognize, addresses from companies I had never heard her mention before. The second folder had invoices. The third folder had copies of identification documents. Not hers, a man's. I froze. His name was unfamiliar. I stared at the page longer than I expected to, trying to understand why my wife would keep copies of another man's identification in a private drawer she told me never to open. There was a passport copy, a driver's license copy, and something else underneath them. A certificate, folded carefully. My fingers hesitated before touching it. I unfolded the paper slowly. Marriage certificate. For a moment my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. The document was official, stamped, signed, real. The bride's name was Laura, my wife. The groom's name was not mine, it was his. The same name printed on the passport copies inside the folder. The certificate was dated 3 years earlier. 3 years. I sat down in her chair without realizing it. The room suddenly felt smaller than before. Too small, too quiet. 3 years earlier meant something very specific. It meant she married him while she was already married to me. I read the certificate again, then again. Maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was fake. Maybe it was part of her work somehow. Maybe there was an explanation. But explanations don't usually come printed with official stamps. My hands started shaking slightly as I searched the drawer again. There were more documents, utility bills, insurance papers, a rental agreement, all with the same man's name and Laura's, together, same address, different city, different life. That's when I noticed something else written on the rental contract. A date, 1 month ago. She was still connected to that address. Still. Which meant this wasn't something from the past. This was something happening right now. I kept staring at the rental agreement long after I finished reading it. 1 month ago. Not 3 years ago. Not something forgotten. Not something from before our marriage. 1 month ago meant this was still happening. Right now. While we were still living together. While we were still sleeping in the same bed every night. My first instinct was to close everything and pretend I had never opened that drawer, but my hands kept moving before I could stop them. There were more folders underneath the contract, more documents, more proof that this wasn't a mistake. I found bank transfer confirmations, regular transfers, every month, same amount, same account number, her name next to his, joint account. I read the page 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding what I was seeing. Laura had another joint account with another man, not an old account, active transfers, recent dates, last transfer just 12 days ago. 12 days. That meant she was still financially connected to him, still sharing something with him, still living part of another life somewhere else. My chest started tightening in a way I couldn't explain. Not panic, not anger. Something heavier, something slower. Like the moment before a storm arrives, but the air hasn't moved yet. I opened another folder. Insurance documents. 2 names again, same address again, same man again. Everything matched. Everything repeated the same story over and over in different forms. Marriage certificate, rental agreement, bank transfers, insurance policy. This wasn't one mistake. This was a system, a second life, carefully organized, carefully hidden, and carefully protected inside one drawer she asked me never to open. Then I noticed something written in blue pen on the corner of one document. A date. Tonight, 7:30 p.m., and below it, one short word, dinner. I checked the clock on the wall in her office. It was already 6:42. Laura wasn't meeting a friend for lunch anymore. She was meeting someone else for dinner, and I suddenly knew exactly who. I checked the clock again. 6:43. If she was meeting him at 7:30, she wasn't across town with a friend. She was already on her way somewhere else, somewhere she never told me about, somewhere connected to that address on the rental agreement. For a moment I just sat there in her chair, holding the paper with the word dinner written in blue ink, trying to decide what to do next. I could call her, ask her where she really was, ask her who he was, ask her why there was another marriage certificate in her drawer. But I already knew what she would say. She would stay calm. She would sound confused. She would tell me I misunderstood something. And she would come home later with the same smile she always used when everything was supposed to feel normal again. Instead, I folded the paper carefully and placed it back exactly where I found it. Then I opened the rental agreement one more time and copied the address into my phone. Different city, 40 minutes away, close enough to drive there before 7:30, close enough to see something I wasn't supposed to see. I stood up slowly, closed the drawer the same way it had been before, and left the office without touching anything else. For the first time in 11 years of marriage, I left my own house without telling my wife where I was going. The drive felt longer than 40 minutes. Every red light lasted too long. Every car in front of me moved too slowly. I kept replaying the same question in my head again and again. How long had this been happening? 3 years? Longer? Had she ever planned to tell me? Or had she expected me to never open that drawer for the rest of my life? The address led me to a quiet residential street. Small houses, identical driveways, same trimmed lawns, same closed garage doors. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just another normal neighborhood. I parked half a block away and stayed inside the car. The rental agreement listed house number 214. The porch light was already on. That meant someone was home. I checked the time again, 7:26, 4 minutes before dinner. Then a car turned the corner slowly and stopped directly in front of house 214. Laura stepped out of the passenger seat. She wasn't alone. The man from the documents walked around the front of the car and opened the door for her like he had done it 100 times before. And she smiled at him the same way she used to smile at me. For a few seconds I couldn't move. Laura stood in front of house 214 like she belonged there. Not like a visitor, not like someone arriving for the first time. She walked up the small path to the front door without hesitation. No checking the address, no looking around, no uncertainty. She already knew where she was going. He followed her calmly, holding a small paper bag in one hand. Dinner. The word written on the document suddenly felt heavier than before. He unlocked the door. Not knocked. Unlocked. Like he lived there. Like she lived there, too. They walked inside together. The porch light stayed on. The door closed behind them. And just like that, my wife disappeared into another house that I had never seen before. I stayed in my car longer than I expected to. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Long enough to understand something I had been trying to avoid since I opened that drawer. This wasn't an old secret. This wasn't paperwork from the past. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She lived 2 lives, one with me, one with him, and both of them were still happening at the same time. I stepped out of the car slowly and walked closer to the house. Not too close, just enough to see the front window. The curtains were open. Inside, the lights were warm, comfortable, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten again. Laura was standing in the kitchen, cooking, like she always did at home. She moved around the room naturally, confidently, like she knew exactly where everything was, like she had done this many times before. He walked behind her and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't move away. She didn't look surprised. She leaned closer to him, like it was normal, like it was routine, like it was their house. I stepped back before they could see me through the window. Suddenly, I understood something else. The marriage certificate wasn't just paper, it was real, because everything inside that house looked real too. The kitchen lights, the table, the chairs, the way she moved inside that space, the way he touched her. Nothing about it looked temporary. Nothing about it looked hidden. It looked like a second marriage, and I was standing outside it like a stranger. I stayed on that street longer than I should have, long enough to see the kitchen lights turn softer as evening settled in, long enough to watch them sit down at the table together, long enough to realize I wasn't looking at a secret meeting. I was looking at a routine. Laura moved through the house like she had lived there for years. She opened cabinets without thinking. She reached for plates without searching. She walked past the hallway without hesitation. This wasn't new to her. This place belonged to her. And that realization changed something inside me, because it meant she hadn't just hidden documents from me. She had hidden a home, a second home. I returned to the car and sat there in silence, staring at the steering wheel without turning the engine on. There were only two possibilities now. Either she visited him sometimes, or she lived there too. And deep down, I already knew which one was true. Then something unexpected happened. The front door opened again. Laura stepped outside alone. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't carrying her bag. She just stood on the porch for a moment like she was waiting for someone. Then she walked down the steps and moved toward the mailbox near the sidewalk, toward me. I lowered my head immediately and leaned back into the seat. She was only a few meters away now, close enough that if she looked inside the car, she would recognize me instantly. My heart started beating faster than it had all evening, but she didn't look inside the car. She opened the mailbox calmly and pulled out a small stack of letters. Then she stood there for a second longer than necessary, looking at the envelopes, reading the names, her name and his, printed together on every letter. Same address, same house number, same street, official mail, utility companies, insurance companies, government letters, not temporary documents, not mistakes, proof of residence, proof of identity, proof of another life. She gathered the letters neatly in her hands and walked back inside the house without ever noticing I was sitting just a few steps away from her. And at that moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until then. Laura wasn't visiting that house. She was living there. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in the car with the engine still off, watching the porch light outside House 214 like it might suddenly explain everything to me. It didn't. Nothing changed. The same warm light stayed on. The same quiet street stayed silent. And inside that house, my wife continued living a life I didn't even know existed. I finally started the engine and drove away slowly, checking the rearview mirror more times than I needed to. I kept expecting the front door to open again. I kept expecting her to step outside and see me leaving. She didn't. The drive back home felt different from the drive there. Before, I had questions. Now I had answers. Too many of them. When I walked into the house, everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The kitchen lights were off. The hallway was quiet. Her shoes were still by the door. Her jacket was still hanging where she left it earlier. Except now I knew she wasn't coming back soon, because she already had another place to return to. I walked upstairs and stood outside her office again. The door was still slightly open. For a moment I thought about leaving it that way, pretending I had never entered that room earlier, pretending I still didn't know anything, but pretending wasn't possible anymore. I walked inside again and closed the door behind me. This time I didn't hesitate before opening the drawer. The marriage certificate was still there. The rental agreement was still there. The bank transfers were still there. Everything exactly where I left it. Except now I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a timeline. 3 years of documents, 3 years of addresses, 3 years of shared finances, 3 years of signatures, 3 years of decisions she made without telling me. I opened another folder I hadn't checked before. Inside were printed emails. Not business emails, personal ones, short messages, dinner plans, travel plans, doctor appointments, repairs for the house, all written like normal conversations between a married couple. Not secret messages, not hidden language, normal life, normal marriage, just not with me. Then I noticed something at the very bottom of the folder. A photograph. Laura standing in front of house 214, next to him, both smiling, and on her left hand, clearly visible in the picture, was a wedding ring I had never seen before. I kept staring at the photograph longer than I expected to. Laura looked different in that picture, not like the version of her I saw every morning in our kitchen. She looked lighter, relaxed, almost younger. The man next to her stood close enough that their shoulders touched naturally, like they had taken dozens of pictures together before that one. And the ring on her hand was not the ring I gave her. I turned the photo over slowly. There was handwriting on the back. First weekend in the new house. First weekend. Not visit, not trip, not vacation. House. That meant she had moved there, at least part of the time. I opened the folder again and searched deeper between the papers. There was a calendar sheet folded neatly between two documents. Her handwriting again. Dates marked in blue. Fridays, Saturdays, some Sundays, almost every weekend for the last 3 years. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed something written next to several of the dates. Stay there, dinner there, night there, morning there, always there, never home. My chest tightened again as I followed the pattern across the page. Every weekend she said she was visiting her sister. Every weekend she said she needed space after a long work week. Every weekend she left the house with the same overnight bag. And every weekend she came back Sunday afternoon like nothing unusual had happened. Except she hadn't been visiting her sister. She had been going to house 214. 3 years. 3 years of weekends. 3 years of excuses that suddenly made perfect sense. Then I noticed something else at the bottom of the calendar page. A date circled in red. Next Saturday. And next to it, one sentence written carefully in her handwriting. Tell Daniel soon. I read the sentence again. Tell Daniel soon. Not today, not tomorrow. Soon. Like it was something she could schedule between 2 weekends, like it was another task she planned to finish when the timing felt convenient enough. I sat there holding that calendar page for a long time, trying to understand what she meant by soon. Soon after what? Soon after another weekend at House 214? Soon after another dinner with him? Soon after another month living 2 lives at the same time? Or soon after she decided which marriage she wanted to keep? For the first time that night, something inside me changed. Until that moment I had been reacting, watching, following, trying to understand. But now I realized something simple. She already had a plan, and I was not part of it. I placed the calendar back inside the drawer carefully and closed it again exactly the way she had left it. Then I walked downstairs and sat at the kitchen table without turning the lights on. The house felt different now, quieter than before, not empty, just unfamiliar, like I was sitting inside someone else's life instead of my own. I checked the time. 9:18. She wouldn't come back tonight. Not after what I had just seen. Not after what that calendar confirmed. Then something else started bothering me. One question I hadn't asked yet: if she planned to tell me soon. What exactly was she planning to tell him? I stood up immediately and walked back upstairs to her office one more time. There was only one place left I hadn't checked yet: the small lockbox near the printer, the one I noticed earlier but ignored. This time I didn't ignore it. It wasn't locked. Inside was a single envelope, thick, heavy, and my name was written on the front in her handwriting. I held the envelope in my hands for several seconds before opening it. My name was written carefully across the front. Daniel. Not rushed, not emotional, neat, planned, like everything else she had hidden from me for the last 3 years. Inside was a letter. Only one page. No explanation at the beginning. No apology at the end. Just the truth written in the middle of the page, like she had rehearsed it many times before putting it on paper. I never wanted you to find out this way. I planned to tell you next weekend. I thought it would be easier once I made my final decision. Final decision. I read that sentence again. She hadn't already chosen. She was still choosing. Between 2 marriages, between 2 homes, between 2 lives. The letter continued. I met him during a project 3 years ago. I didn't expect anything to happen, but it did. And after some time I realized I couldn't leave either of you immediately. I thought I needed time to understand what I really wanted. Time. 3 years of time. 3 years of weekends. 3 years of lies. She wrote that she had planned to tell me everything the following Saturday after dinner at House 214. That was the date circled on the calendar. Tell Daniel soon. Not a confession. A decision announcement. She was going to inform me which marriage she had chosen. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I walked downstairs and sat at the kitchen table again. For the first time that night, everything felt clear. Not easier, not calmer, just clear. I understood something I hadn't understood earlier. She believed she had 2 marriages, but I only had 1. And it had already ended the moment she signed that second certificate 3 years ago. I didn't wait for Saturday. I didn't wait for her decision. The next morning I called a lawyer. By the time Laura came home Sunday afternoon with the same familiar smile she always used after her weekends away, the divorce papers were already waiting for her on the kitchen table. And this time, I was the one who had made the final decision,